When I first started public speaking, I struggled to create a speech. I didn't know what to put at the start, I didn't know what to put in the middle, and I didn't know what to put in the end. And I wasn't sure how to structure it whatsoever. Doing speeches and speeches and speeches, I've created this formula, so every time that I have a speech, I can just copy this formula. And now I'm going to give it to you, so you can do exactly the same and you don't have to struggle when it comes to putting together a speech. First thing you need to do when you're doing a speech is figuring out who is it for. You need to find out who your audience is, because depending on who your audience is, depends on what language you're going to use and what content you're going to use. For example, if it is an adult audience that are in their 40s, the language that I'm going to use is going to be completely different if it's an audience of kids. So you need to make sure how you're telling your story and what stories you're going to include are suitable for your audience. After that, you need to know your purpose. What is the purpose of the speech? Is it to educate? Is it to inspire? Is it to tell your story? You need to know the exact purpose of why you are speaking. Why are you on that stage speaking to everyone in front of you? Because if you don't know that, when you get to speaking, they won't know why you're on the stage either. I'm going to use my last speech as an example, which was at Toastmasters. Number one, the audience was, on average, I'm going to say 40 plus. That was the age. Number two, the purpose. The purpose of my speech was to give a speech with purpose. That was the criteria that I had to follow. And because of that, I thought, what's everyone into here? Everyone was there for the same reason, for communication. And because of that, I did a speech on communication, and in particular on filler words, because I took note of the audience and I took note of the purpose. Everyone was there for the communication, and the purpose of that speech was to give a speech on purpose. That is the exact criteria that I got, that I had to follow. And for that reason, I did it on communication. But before I go into step number 3, there is a link below. And if you want some tools in the bag to improve your communication skills, all I ask for is your email. Put your email below and I'll send over some tools to improve your communication. Because you don't want the communication to be the reason that you don't get that job, or you don't get that pay rise, or you don't get that girlfriend, all because you can't communicate your thoughts across. So check that link out below. Before you start any speech, you need to know a message. And I like to call it a 5-second message. If you can't sum it up in a sentence or 2 sentences, your speech will be too vague. It won't have a direct point. It won't have a focus. And because it won't have a focus, you won't have a purpose to your speech. And this is why your purpose and your message have to link. But sometimes your message is not enough. We want to get the fine details out of this. We want to make it as simple as possible. Because the best communicators in the world, they can get a very complicated subject and make it sound simple. And that's what you want to do when you're doing your speeches. When you're giving your speeches, you want to make it simple. Because you're not just speaking to be remembered, you're speaking to be repeated. And the way you'll be repeated, that was Snapchat, but the way you will be repeated is by having a simple phrase. And a simple phrase makes it very easy to be repeated. With this phrase, it's going to be no more than 10 words. My simple phrase for the story about getting rid of your filler words was, if in doubt, breathe in instead of out. If they remember one thing in my entire speech, it's that line right there. The simple phrase. That is the most important thing of your story, because that's what they're going to repeat. And when they repeat it, they will remember it. You don't just say it once in your story. You can start repeating it throughout once you've told them the story and you got into the message part. But having a phrase before you even start building your speech is crucial. Step number 5. What's going to be your main bit of the speech? Your options are including a story, including an acronym, including an activity, or including analogies. It's up to you. You've got 4 options here. And you are not limited to one. If you're telling a 10-minute speech, you don't just have to tell a story. You could tell a story and put an analogy in there. 2 points for the same message to back up what you are saying. In my speech that I did, I started with a story. My story was when I was in Perth in 2019 getting interviewed after my fight. And after my fight, all I would say was filler words. I go into how the person interviewing me wasn't taking me serious because I was saying filler words several times a sentence. The analogy that I used was with post-it notes. I'm just going to show you with highlighters. You see writing on this whiteboard now. I start covering it up. Starts making it very hard to read now. And that's what the filler words do. They make it hard to understand, hard to digest. But as you start taking these filler words away, out of your speech, you simplify your speech. Because now you just have the words that count. And it makes it a lot easier to understand. I had a story and an analogy. Can the audience relate to what you are speaking about? If they can't relate to your story, or they can't relate to the analogy, or the acronym, or the activity, put it in the bin. There's no point putting that into your speech because they need to see themselves in your shoes. And if they can't do that, it's hard to relate. And if they can't relate, it's going to be hard to get your message across. Excuse my very messy handwriting. Now in my story, could they relate? Everyone's there for communication. I get to see everyone speak when they do their speeches. And 90% of them include ums and ahs when they speak. They have got better over time whilst they've been in Toastmasters. But with my story, I showed from saying them all the time to not saying them at all. And because of that, they can relate on this journey. It's something they can easily see themselves do if they put in the work. It's just a system they have to follow. Now, once you've done all of that, your job is simple. Write the speech. You're going to have an intro. You're going to have a middle. And you're going to have an end. Your intro is your hook. If they give a little 2-minute speech or a little minute speech on what your speech is going to entail, and it's a document or a piece of writing that you've sent over, and it clearly states what they are going to get out of this speech, you don't need to include this bit. You can go straight into the meat of the story. But if that's not been included before your speech by someone of the organization, you want to let them know what you are speaking about. Because if they know what you're speaking about, they're more likely to pay attention early on. Because if you can answer what you learned, how you learned it, and if they followed the same approach, will they get the same results? If you can answer those 3 questions, people will care what you've got to say. And in the intro, if you can answer number 3, if they copy the same process, will they get the same results? If you can answer that, they are more likely to listen to your story of what you learnt and how you learnt it. An example of this with mine is saying this is how you can eliminate filler words completely from your speech so it's a thing of the past. I've clearly stated what they're going to get. It's a hook because it appeals to the audience. It attracts their attention. Now because they know what they're going to get and they know it's achievable, they are more likely to listen to what I've got to tell them of what I learnt and how I learnt it. They're going to be more engaged into the speech. The middle bit is going to be the story, acronym, analogy, or the activity. And then the ending is just, what's the message? This is where you're going to include your message and you're going to include your simple phrase. But as well as that, you're going to include reflective questions to make them think about their life and their situation. But not only can you just do that at the end, you can do that whilst you're telling your story. You can check out of your story to check back in. For example, you can be telling your story, you can be in the moment, and then you're going to check out of the story, ask a question that is related to the audience. You're going to say, have you ever felt this? Or have you ever been in this situation? Or raise your hand if you've had this feeling before. And then you're going to go back into your story. It makes the audience think a little bit more about their situation. So by the time you get to the end, the message, they're going to be able to relate more. And that is number 6. That's the whole point of this. Can they relate? Because if they can relate, they are more likely to buy into your message. So we have the intro, we have the middle bit, and the end bit, which is very, very important. Use the lesson of the story and find the universal emotion and the universal change that they can implement in their life to benefit them. With the filler words, I talked about Perth, my problems in Perth on the microphone, doing my interview, struggling to do a sentence without saying any filler words. I then get the universal emotion was I wasn't comfortable with the pause. I wasn't comfortable with pausing. I then used the message. I then told them how they can improve it in their life and the system that they can follow, because that's the system that I followed and it worked for me. And if it worked for me, it can work for you. That's where the simple phrase goes. If in doubt, breathe in instead of out. Because if you breathe in, you can't speak because the oxygen's going in. When you breathe out, you can speak. And if you can speak, you can say a filler word. So whenever you think you're going to say a filler word, you breathe in, you pause, breathe in. I can't even say because I'm breathing in. And that was the whole message of my speech. That was the whole purpose of my speech, to drill that one sentence, that one simple phrase into them. And that's what you need to do in the ending of your speech. Drill the message into them. We want it simple. You can have your overall message, but get something that simplifies it. And then some little points on that. If you are doing a presentation, do not plan the presentation first, then plan the speech after. People are there to see you speak. They're not there to see you read words off a slide. If you use a presentation, use pictures, make it engaging. If you've got bullet points, a couple words per bullet point. Do not put sentences in. That is what your mouth is there for. That's what your voice is there for. Speak. Use it. You want the eyes on you. You don't want the eyes on a computer screen. But just make sure if you have a presentation, it is the secondary thing of that speech. The primary thing is your voice, is your actual speech. That is the formula that I will follow to create a speech. And I made this because I was struggling to put together speeches. I'd be there sitting at the computer screen looking at my document for hours trying to put something together. And the way the best speakers can create speeches in seconds is because they have a massive story bank. Massive. They document their stories every single day. That is Snapchat again. Bloody hell. Snapchat, calm down, love. But they have a story bank which allows them to literally go through their bank and just be like, yep, I'm going to use that story, use that message, use that simple phrase, let's go. They already know the story. That means they don't need to plan the speech. You can have one story and it could be 5 different speeches. It could be 5 different messages. If you take a different perspective from the same story, you can tell it from a different angle. And that's why they can create speeches just like that. And if you like this video, you will probably like this one from YouTube as well. And like I said earlier, the link below for improving your communication skills and expanding your knowledge. I will send you the tools to transform and 2x your confidence to speak. And so that when you walk into a room, you know you can command that room. You know you can win that room over. Because it doesn't matter how technical you are. If you can't communicate that point across, it's pointless.